Little bunny right here. All right, guys, I am super excited. I am giving my best Wednesday Addams vibes today. It is the first official day of fall, even though it's been fall in my heart long before today. So let me take a minute to welcome you back to Silent Motive. I'm Danny. On today's episode, we're just going to kind of dive right in. But I chose this episode to come out hopefully the middle of October. So this episode does take place on the East Coast. So we're just going to travel on back there to the place that holds my heart, New York. Now, I've never been to New York in the month of August, but I would imagine it's a warmer time of year. Summer is ending and fall hasn't quite found its way in yet, unlike now. I want you to picture this. A young 30-year-old Karina Vetrano. She decides that she's going to go on a solo jog through Spring Creek Park. Her usual running partner and father, Philip Vetrano, he couldn't make it that day due to a back injury. I can attest to back injuries from running. They are not a good time. Now, despite her dad objecting to her running alone, she was dedicated and she went anyway. Karina was last seen alive just after 5 p.m. on August 2nd, 2016. Philip was actually the one who found his daughter laying face down with her chest exposed. Her underwear and her running shorts were tangled around her thigh and completely off her other leg, which was covered in scratches and bruises. It was ruled out during her autopsy that Karina died from strangulation, but also had been sexually assaulted. It wasn't until February of the following year that someone would be arrested in correlation to this horrendous crime and held accountable thanks to DNA evidence. Who killed Karina? And why the hell did it take 6 months to find a suspect? Why is there so much controversy around the one person who ended up being found guilty of these crimes against Karina? I do want to just let everyone know that what we're going to talk about does involve sexual assault and abuse. So if that's something that bothers you, maybe skip to the next episode or go back and rewatch the first episode. Karina Ann Vetrano was born July 12th, 1986 in New York City. She grew up with a brother and a sister. Her father worked a career with the FDNY and was actually a first responder on the 9/11 attacks. Karina went to Malloy High School and graduated from St. John's University with a master's degree. Karina ended up residing in the same neighborhood as her parents and worked with children with autism in Manhattan. She was basically a badass all the way around. She had an awesome family. She had an awesome education. She was smart. She was compassionate. Karina had goals. She wanted to become a writer. She even had her own website where she could showcase her poems, her thoughts, and her writings. She was vibrant. She was outgoing. And she was an independent woman who enjoyed life to its fullest. We love a badass bitch. Karina's independence and love of running was a huge part of who she was. And as someone who has dabbled in running myself, I know the strange mix of empowerment and vulnerability that comes with it. I haven't been a runner my whole life. I haven't been a runner recently. I have run 2 half marathons last year. When you sign up to run 13.1 miles, you typically train ahead of time. I promise there's a reason for the backstory. I've never been a good runner. So I was someone who needed to train before I ran 13 miles. Being a woman and being a police officer, I personally opted to never really run during the nighttime or dark. Something about running when it's dark out was not on my bucket list. I would typically do my runs in the morning just to get them over with, because if I sat there and stewed all day, they wouldn't happen. A study was done in 2023 by Adidas, and out of 9,000 runners across 9 countries, 9,000 runners across 9 countries, 92% of women in that survey stated they were concerned for their safety while they were running. Over half of those women stated they were scared they would get attacked. That's compared to 28% of men in that same survey. 38% of these women have experiences, either physical or verbal harassment while running. In a separate survey that was done in 2021 of 3,700 people, women are 3 times more likely to be catcalled or harassed by people than men are while running. It's pretty pathetic to think that people can't just be decent and let people run and get their run out without being in fear of this kind of bullshit. Those fears are not abstract. They live in the mind of every woman who steps onto a quiet path by themselves. Runner or not, for Karina, Howard Beach felt familiar, even safe. But safety, as we know it, can be deceptive. So the neighborhood of Howard Beach, Queens, was a relatively quiet one near where she lived. Karina figured she was safe. It was a block away from her home. She had run this route with her dad plenty of times prior and never had a concern in the world, nor should she. Philip and Karina had been in contact during her run, checking in through text messages. Karina stopped responding, and then Karina didn't make it home after hours. Philip ultimately went to an NYPD neighbor and told him about the circumstance, and they made the police report together. So a situation like this doesn't typically go this way. When adults go missing, they aren't usually automatically documented as a missing person for at least 24 hours. I've seen this plenty of times where the person making the report is told adults are able to not respond. Maybe they wanted some time. Maybe they went for a drive, so on and so forth. I mean, it's just the way the world is. Adults are allowed to have those freedoms. The fact that Philip was a retired firefighter and had an NYPD neighbor who likely knew him and Karina personally probably helped this case move a little bit faster the day that this happened, the day of her disappearance, which also made it so that Karina was found a lot quicker. Ultimately, a search party was put together and they began searching around 7 p.m. Now, she was last seen at 5 p.m., so 2 hours later, they've got a search party looking for her. It wasn't until around 11 p.m. that Philip found his daughter in a marshy part of the park about 15 feet off the trail. Philip found his daughter face down, her hands full of weeds that she had tried to grab a hold of to prevent herself from being dragged off the path. Karina had a chipped tooth and had been beat. Her running shorts were twisted and removed, likely due to being sexually assaulted. Karina was strangled to death. Karina was strangled so hard that there was a handprint found around her neck. The amount of force that it takes to manually strangle somebody is quite a lot. And it's such a personal attack. This is literally every parent's worst nightmare. I cannot even begin to imagine this happening. But then to also be the person who finds her, that would be complete devastation. The police checked the area for anything that seemed unusual and to see if they could locate any witnesses nearby. As police documented the horrific scene, they also collected what would become the most crucial piece of the puzzle, DNA. But as we'll hear, DNA doesn't always deliver quick answers. DNA was located under Karina's fingernails, as well as her phone and on her back. Good on her for scratching and clawing and fighting. Unfortunately, when the DNA was initially run in CODIS, there were no hits for the DNA. So what that means is when someone commits a crime and is convicted, typically it's going to be violent offenders or other more serious crimes. It just kind of depends on the state law requiring DNA be provided at the time of conviction. But their DNA is entered into a national database. This database helps local and federal law enforcement to search for matches of DNA profiles from crime scenes and offenders. In Karina's case, because there was no match, that likely meant that either the person who committed these crimes had not been convicted in previous assaults or crimes, hence making their DNA available in CODIS, or they hadn't been caught yet. Either way, It's disheartening for an investigation, and I can attest to this. The reason it ended up finding a match 6 months later was because the suspect was detained and his DNA was collected, and it was entered into, well, it was run by whatever crime lab this particular agency uses, probably a state crime lab, and it was entered into that system, which matched the DNA from the crime scene that was found on Karina. But we'll circle back to him later. Other things that were found was surveillance footage of Karina running through the park, but there wasn't anyone following her, leading police to believe that whoever did this came in a different entrance. Police released that there would be a $10,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of the suspect associated with this incident. That amount grew over the next few months to over $250,000 because of a GoFundMe account that was created by Karina's family members. The GoFundMe reached over $290,000 by the end, and the extra money was donated to charity. Eerily enough, not even a week after Karina's murder, while running, another woman, 27-year-old Vanessa Marcotte, was killed while out for a run in Princeton, Massachusetts. The DNA that was located on Vanessa was different from the DNA that was found on Karina. It just solidifies the terror that can come with being a woman running or walking by themselves. It's wild to think that not even a week apart, two females get killed, not just attacked, but killed while trying to better themselves. This sparked conversations amongst communities about women exercising alone. We can't run alone, we can't walk alone, because there's always going to be this fear of being murdered. It happened a week apart. With no DNA match, investigators turned to more traditional methods, searching for witnesses and working off a single description that would lead them down a frustrating path. By the end of August, with no leads to really follow, the NYPD shared a sketch of a person of interest that was seen by a Verizon worker that was in the area during the time of the attack. This worker had seen a man coming out of the weeds running. After the sketch was released, a former NYPD chief saw the sketch. Working as head of security of an apartment building in Brooklyn, he thought the sketch looked like a tenant. The former chief notified officers who paid that individual a visit. The man, identified as Kevin, refused to speak with police. When Kevin finally left, police followed him and brought him downtown. Kevin refused to provide a sample of DNA willingly, which was pretty sus. While Kevin did match the drawing, there wasn't enough for police to be sure he was even the guy. Eventually, Kevin provided his DNA through a discarded water bottle, and he did not match the DNA that was found on Karina. And yes, a discarded water bottle can be used to collect DNA. So can the cigarette butt that you flick onto the sidewalk, because it's trash. It's abandoned property. While this lead went nowhere, another name soon resurfaced from months earlier. A young man was spotted behaving strangely in the area. His name was Channel Lewis. Maybe it's Chanel, I don't know. We're gonna go with Channel Lewis, which this whole thing seems kind of like an anomaly that they contacted him, but Lieutenant Russo, who lived in Howard Beach, took another look at the case in January of 2017. Russo remembered back in May of 2016, he saw a person in a long-sleeve tracksuit, even though it was 80 degrees, and that made him kind of curious. Like, middle of May in a tracksuit? That's weird. The person had a hood over their head, and they were walking away from Russo. Russo called it in to patrol officers to check them out because they appeared to be casing houses. When police arrived, the person was gone on arrival, or GOA. The following day, however, neighbors made reports of a similar man being suspicious as fuck, trespassing in yards. Russo actually located the male, asked him for his name, and he identified as 19-year-old Channel Lewis. The call for service didn't really go much farther than that. So back to 2017, Russo looked into Lewis a little bit more because he just had a gut feeling, I guess. His digging yielded nothing spectacular. No criminal history, but was served multiple summons. It didn't really say what those were. Russo then tells Detective Barry Brown to look into Lewis. Now, like I said, there wasn't a whole lot to go off of when it came to questioning Lewis in relation to this case. Lewis had recently graduated high school and lived with his mom and sister in East New York. The neighborhood that he lived in was adjacent to Howard Beach and was connected by Spring Creek Park. Lewis agreed to speak with police and did tell them he was familiar with the area. Lewis spoke about being a lone wolf type and didn't have a big group of friends, so from time to time, he liked to walk the trails and listen to music and clear his head. When asked, Lewis willingly gave his DNA on February 2nd, 2017. Detective Brown did some more follow-up at the high school that Lewis graduated from and spoke with one of Lewis's former teachers. The teacher told Detective Brown that Lewis had some issues with girls in the past. Lewis had asked if he could bring a knife to school tomorrow when they asked him why. Lewis's response was, "I want to kill all the girls," which ended up getting Lewis suspended. Now, Richard Lewis, Channel's dad, spoke out on behalf of his son, or so he thought. Richard told detectives it couldn't have been his son that committed these awful crimes against Karina. Richard said he took his son, Channel, to the hospital the day after the murder, where Channel claimed he had been in a fight and got treatment for an injured hand. After figuring out which hospital Channel was taken to, detectives spoke to the doctor who saw Channel. The doctor said he removed a quote-unquote foreign object from Channel's hand, which was believed to be the chipped part of Karina's tooth that was missing. Richard was probably shocked when he found out the details of Karina's injuries that matched his son.
She's got a chipped tooth. He's got a piece of tooth in his hand.
Richard and his wife, Veta Lewis, they came from Jamaica to the United States in 1992. They believed that they had raised a respectable and considerate son. On the surface, Channel seemed like an unlikely suspect. But when detectives sat him down for questioning, the story he told would change everything. On February 5th, 2017, Channel was brought back to the station to be questioned. Channel was given his Miranda warning, which he said he understood, and decided to speak with everyone. Channel is asked where he was the evening of the murder. Channel said he was in the park by himself around 5 p.m. Channel describes the park as having high grass and trails. Now, this is directly from his interview. It's a video of the interview with Channel. And this is him and his narrative that he provides. There's some casual discussion of what he was wearing, but then the prosecutor, which I found that odd just because I've never had a prosecutor interview a suspect or a potential suspect or a witness or anything ever in my cases. So that was weird. But he was the one that was conducting the interview. So the prosecutor asks him if anything happened when he was in the park. Channel says, yeah, and proceeds to tell them that there was a girl jogging and one thing led to another. Channel says when Karina got close because of a past situation unrelated to her or anything even remotely close, he says he hit her. Channel admits to grabbing her and hitting her because he was mad about something that happened earlier that day. Channel admits to hitting her at least 5 times and then wrapping his hands around her neck and squeezing. Channel admits that when he was strangling her, how she was moving, and then she just drops like dead weight into the water. Channel says he put her face in the ground and he realized he was bleeding, so he goes to wash up. This whole time during this interview, Channel has no emotion and he's completely unbothered. Channel described how he moved Karina into the high grass off the path. He even says how he got back onto the path, how he couldn't see her. He knew what he was doing. He moved her off the path into the tall grass so that no one would find her. With a confession in hand and DNA tying him to the crime, prosecutors prepared for what would become one of the most watched trials in New York City at the time. Channel was booked into jail the same day of his interview and was held without bail until the trial. November 5th, 2018, trial begins. Channel enters a not guilty plea to the charges of murder and sexual abuse. Channel was facing 25 years to life in prison if he was found guilty. Now Philip, Karina's dad, testified to how he started a search party and how he found his daughter face down, beaten, and dead. 2 days after Philip, the jury watched Channel's confession. They played it. They played the video of his confession in the trial. A forensic biologist, Linda Rosano, testified about how DNA works. Linda explained that there was a 1 in 6 trillion chance, let me repeat that again, 1 in 6 trillion chance of someone else sharing Channel's genetic profile. So there's no way. The trial ended with a hung jury somehow because there were claims that the DNA evidence was contaminated. But justice, even when it feels within reach, can be fragile. The first trial collapsed into a mistrial, forcing Karina's family to endure months more of waiting before a second jury would hear the case. Trial got pushed back, as it does, to March of 2019. Ultimately, Channel was found guilty on 2 counts of second-degree murder, 1 count of first-degree murder, and 1 count of sexual abuse on April 1st, 2019. And no, this was not an April Fool's joke. The jury deliberated for 5 hours to come to that verdict. At sentencing, Channel was sentenced to life without parole. After his conviction, there has been questions posed and appeals made in this case. Some are saying the way that the DNA was collected is questionable as far as ethics go. A few sources say that initially the NYPD utilized a quote-unquote tactic called dragnet. I've never heard of this type of tactic. But here's what I found is that it is essentially where a mass collection of DNA is conducted in the area of an incident. If I'm reading it correctly, if you have experience with this tactic of dragnetting, leave me a comment down below because I've never heard of this one. But it's rumored that there were over 360 black men that had their DNA collected. This helped lead them in the investigation for Channel. I'm not entirely sure how NYPD works, or rather how the laws were back not that long ago. But that's potentially a lot of consensual DNA swabs or a hell of a lot of random warrants that were written. The problem with that logic is you have to have probable cause to have a warrant that has to be approved and signed by a judge. Even with a guilty verdict, this case didn't close neatly. Questions about how police gathered the DNA and whether the investigation was fair continued to shadow this case. In my mind, I just kind of go back to the injuries. Karina's tooth was chipped. A foreign object, likely a tooth, was removed from Channel's hand. It's too bad that they couldn't have looked at it more. The doctor testified to what he removed in the trial. That seems like that would be good enough evidence. Plus, you have Channel's confession. Documents show that he was interviewed for 6 hours, which isn't uncommon in these types of cases. Adults in homicide investigations are typically held for 10 to 12 hours. Now, juveniles or children, that's a different story. But to question an adult who has made the conscious decision to speak with law enforcement about the loss of another person's life is by no means excessive. I even asked a typical time frame to question a homicide suspect from my coworkers who have been doing homicide investigations for a significant amount of time. They are experts at what they do. And their response was 6 hours is not excessive. At the end of the day, there was clearly enough evidence tying Channel to Karina's case. The tooth, the injury to his hand from literally assaulting her and punching her in the mouth, and the details he provided about how he strangled her to death and drug her body away from the trail so that she would not be seen. Karina's life was taken because Channel was having a bad day. There were probably some mental health concerns there as well, because people don't just go out and kill some random stranger because we have this thing called restraint. Parents lost a child. Her siblings lost their sister. For every woman who laces up her shoes for a run or a walk, Karina's story lingers in the shadows. A reminder that sometimes even the most ordinary paths can turn deadly. That's all for this episode. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Thanks for sticking around for another episode of Silent Motive. Just a reminder that sometimes the darkest truths hide in the most ordinary spaces. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and follow us to enjoy our next episode, where we dive into another modern mystery that blurs the lines between creepy and criminal.